Dontnod have had a bit of a patchy history in their relatively short time as a game dev. Founded in 2008 with their debut title coming in 2013, Remember Me was ironically a rather forgettable action-adventure title. However, 2 years later they released a game that, while being very different, still retained similar themes in memory and identity and retooled the rewinding time mechanic from Remember Me. This, paired with Square Enix's willingness to push a female-led title, led to the birth of Life is Strange, and it became something of a phenomenon. The Parisian devs found their stride with hard-hitting, character-driven stories with a focus on giving the spotlight to those who traditionally are just used as a side or supporting characters, such as LGBTQ+ characters and people of colour, all while telling well-crafted and highly emotional stories. From this point on, Dontnod made a commitment to leave the AAA games behind and devote themselves to independent projects, which led them to the well-liked, if not critically renowned, action RPG Vampire. Once again being praised for their wonderful character work, but the game was let down by its poor performance and excruciatingly long load times. Dontnod followed up on the success of Life is Strange with an expansion of sorts with the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit, and of course the eventual sequel Life is Strange 2. And once again, Dontnod's excellent character work got a lot of praise despite other aspects of the overall experience not living up to its predecessor. Well, Dontnod are back at it once again with a new character-driven episodic adventure. Tell me why, but how does it stack up with its precursors? Is it another character masterclass, or is it just a pale imitation of past glory? Let's find out. Welcome to Eat Sleep Game. My name is Luke and I have been playing Tell Me Why. As always, we start with visuals, and Tell Me Why is pretty inconsistent. At times the game looks great with detailed character models and some beautiful scenery, from the snowy peaks of the Alaskan mountain ranges to the more rural graffiti covered buildings. But there are times where the detail just disappears, from some poor to missing altogether textures, making the game look like it hasn't quite finished loading at times. But without question, the biggest issue I had was the general lack of facial expressions. This being a Dontnod game, there are of course a number of highly tense, highly emotional scenes where characters will either lose their cool with each other, snap at each other, or have a complete and total breakdown, having a full-blown panic attack. And that should be really hard to watch and really uncomfortable to play through. But I was completely thrown out of most of those scenes multiple times because the character's face were just not emoting at all. The scenes were uncomfortable to watch, but not because of the high emotion. They were uncomfortable because of how robotic characters would look.
So I stabbed her.
Also, as with Dontnod's prior title Life is Strange, lip syncing is pretty bad, which wouldn't be a huge problem in most games, but in a game that is 90% dialogue and half of that is with the camera pointed directly at characters' faces, it becomes really distracting and again does come across really robotic, at odds with the often great looking character models. The robotic theme continues a little longer, unfortunately, as the character animations can be quite clunky and stiff at times, with characters moving unnaturally, especially on occasions where you are interacting with something and another character tries to walk past or through you in a lot of the cases. It's a shame because this is easily Dontnod's most impressive game visually, but it is bogged down with almost cliche issues.
Time. Whenever you're ready.
You sure you don't want to go?
Nah.
A lot of the time the overall audio is great, with some great use of licensed songs opening each episode, a lot of great environmental audio work, from the crunch of the crisp Alaskan snow to unscrewing and removing a plank of wood, mostly sounding really authentic. Voiceover is where the inconsistencies creep back in, however. For the most part, characters are well acted and sound organic, but on occasion, mostly in general conversation, characters can again feel really robotic and pretty awkward. And sure, people can be awkward, but in these instances, the characters know each other really well and the awkwardness does not fit the scene. In such a dialogue heavy game, it is very easy to throw players out of important and emotional scenes when the voiceover just isn't hitting his mark, and unfortunately that does happen here. Thankfully, it does happen less as the game proceeds through its 3 episodes, mostly occurring in the first, but I found it difficult to stay invested in what was going on after the combination of the robotic voices, robotic faces, and robotic animations knocked me out of a few key scenes.
Anyway, how's the shopping spree going? Finding everything you need?
Yeah, I'd be done already, but I'm letting Tyler browse and take it all in.
Must be weird for him to be back here.
Tell Me Why is focused around the story of twins Alison Ronan and her brother Tyler Ronan, the latter of which has spent the last 10 years in the Fireweed Juvenile Detention Centre after killing their mother in self-defense. Finally, Tyler, formerly Ollie, who has transitioned into a male and changed his name, reunites with Alison and returns to their home of Delos Crossing to sell their old house and finally put the past behind them and move on with their lives. But of course, in clearing out their old childhood home, they find more than they bargained for and have to uncover the truth of their mother, Marianne, and what set in motion the events that led to her death. All in all, the story is a solid one. While the first episode is a little too melodramatic and plays on Tyler's transition a little too much for my liking, in hindsight it is a great allegory for people being so fixated on one thing that they are unable to see the truth of the situation. In this case, Tyler is so sure that his mother attacked him because of him cutting his hair as a child that he is blind to the real truth of his childhood, which comes to light in later episodes. Episode 2 is without question the strongest of the 3 episodes, and it's where most of the character development and growth occurs, with the final episode being where everything finally falls in place. Characters are very, very well done overall. You learn so much throughout each episode. It is almost overwhelming how it seems that every single character you have met has an entirely new dimension that has been hidden until that point. From a close friend betraying their friend in trying to help them, to a suspicious character that turns out to be completely genuine. Characters are so well layered, and those layers are peeled away almost faultlessly. Dialogue can be a little ham-fisted at times and can err on the side of daytime TV drama levels, but generally the writing is of a high enough quality that it is able to float above that, if only just at times.
But you two had a big fight a few months before her death, didn't you?
We argued all the time. You'll have to be more specific.
Tell Me Why's gameplay is your standard fare walking sim, wander around, interact with certain objects, nothing new but nothing poor either, despite some of the general movement being quite stiff and clumsy at points, and at times it was quite finicky getting into position and having to move the camera around into position separately to interact with certain objects. Alison and Tyler have a supernatural connection that allows them to speak to each other through thought, and both develop a new ability through the game which makes them occasionally be able to see an apparition of a memory when they come across something that reminds them of said memory. But at certain points they will both have different recollections, which you then have to use what you've learnt about the characters involved in that memory to correctly pick which is the correct memory. When used well, they offer good hints to the solution of situations and offer a nice bit of exposition without feeling too forced. But while the added puzzle element to the different memories is a nice addition, they are pretty easy to figure out. Plus, too often memories can just be used for pointless exposition, which, while adding to the backstory of characters, does not really add all that much worthwhile and leaves it feeling a bit unnecessary at points. The puzzles are an absolute highlight of the game for me. They mostly revolve around a book of short stories called The Book of Goblins from the twins' childhood. For instance, the first puzzle you come across is to unlock a door, and the clues to solving it are in certain stories from said book, which you will need to sift through to solve. It's a really clever way of making players engage with the world a little more, and the way the book actually ties in with the greater narrative in the end is done in such a clever and satisfying way. Honestly, the excellent way the puzzles are handled and how well characters are written, Tell Me Why makes me dream of a full-on detective thriller from Dontnod one day. A man can dream.
Bingo.
Finally, there is only one type of recurring collectible, and it once again ties very neatly into the Book of Goblins. You will come across these little wooden toys which were carved by the twins' mother and hidden throughout the game world, which are characters from Alison and Tyler's childhood stories. They are really, really well hidden throughout the game too, not in that they are hard to find, because as long as you're having a good look around key locations, you will find them fairly easily, but more in that they are hidden around the characters they are representative of and hints at the characters' true nature. Each one of these toys brings a short audio description of said character, which, as mentioned and as you'll find out later in the game, each one of these characters are based on a character from the game, and their standing in the Book of Goblins reflects their true nature that you uncover by the end of the game. You don't get anything more than an achievement for collecting all 13 toys, but near the end of the game you will find wood carved stands for each one of those characters to be returned to. But if you are one or two short, do not fret, because you can replay specific points in each episode just to find the one you missed and hop straight back out, which is a really nice touch instead of having to retread ground. With these toys, it almost feels like the twins' mother was leaving hints for the twins as to the truth of her story, similarly to Faye leading Kratos through Midgard in God of War. Tell Me Why ran just fine for the most part. However, I noticed something odd during cutscene. Some characters just freeze in place in the background when they are no longer the active character. For instance, Tom the shop owner here is supposedly running up the items that Alison and Tyler have just picked out when they start talking to another character, and even after the cutscene, it took a few seconds for his animation to restart. Otherwise, apart from getting a little framey here and there, Tell Me Why ran just fine.
How's business?
Oh, a little light on customers, but that's given us time to finish up the inventory.
Admittedly, despite getting a happy ending, the climax of the story felt hollow and unrewarding. Despite working out the whole puzzle and connecting all the dots, the ending, while well written, was a little anticlimactic. The epilogue does do a good job of tying off a few loose ends eventually, but it would have been more fulfilling had the main ending given me that little bit more of an immediate conclusion. Tell Me Why is at its absolute best when you are interacting with and learning about all the characters around you and solving the well-crafted puzzles. The story may be pretty chock full of cliches, but it's told well enough that it's worth following even after its peak during episode 2, and the game's great character work is the main pillar propping up the story, making the experience a worthwhile one. As said, this game doesn't do much, nor is the story really strong enough to move the genre forward like Life is Strange before it, but despite its flaws, it is still worth a playthrough just for its wonderful character work.
Oh, man, you're good.
I told you not to doubt the golden arm.
Well, we'll never make that mistake again.